This week we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 13. It's what's probably the most familiar parable that Jesus told. But beginning in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus started teaching in parables. Now, prior to this, Jesus was very open. Jesus was very plain about who he was and about what his kingdom represented, and the fact that he was the Son of God, the fact that God was his Father, and the fact that he was God in the flesh. And so as we look at this, the Pharisees, they didn't want to hear about all of that, and so I believe they truly knew who Jesus was, but they didn't want to accept who Jesus was because they were threatened. Their own power was threatened by Jesus, and so they accused him of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub, the power of Satan himself. And so after that, it began this transition. They did it in chapter 12, and then in chapter 13, Jesus began teaching in parables. And so I believe Jesus was doing that not to try to hide anything from the Pharisees, but to separate his true disciples from those who aren't truly disciples, those who are truly of the kingdom of God, from those who are not of the kingdom of God. And so he taught in parables. And as he taught this first parable about the seed and the sower, he told this parable of a sower went out in the field and sowed some seeds. Some fell by the wayside, some fell in the stony soil, some fell in the thorny ground, and some fell in the good soil. And so then the disciples that came up to Jesus, they was kind of confused about this. They came up to Jesus in Matthew chapter 13, and they said to Jesus in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 10, and the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? So you've been speaking plainly up to this point, so why are you now speaking in parables? And some of these times the disciples didn't even know what Jesus was talking about. And so this is the difference between the disciples and the world. The disciples, they wanted to know what Jesus was talking about. They had a desire, they had a longing within them to know exactly what it was that Jesus was talking about. And so Jesus then began to tell them, the rest of the world, their eyes are closed, their ears are dull, their heart is hardened. They're not going to be able to understand what I'm saying, but you want to understand what I'm saying. And he said to them in verse 16, he said, But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. And he said in verse 17, For verily I say unto you, that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them. And so the rest of the world, they had an opportunity to hear them, but they didn't want to hear them. The prophets of old and the godly men of old, they wanted to hear him, but they weren't in that time to hear him. And so how blessed are you? And so we need to understand how blessed we are today, because we can still hear the truths of Jesus, but we have to want to hear them, just like the gospel. And that's what the seed is. The seed is the gospel. Jesus said is the word of the kingdom. It is the gospel. And so the one who is sowing the seed is the evangelist. And so as he sows that seed out, friend, you have to want to hear it. And so this whole week we're going to be talking about what is the wayside that the seed fell on, and what is the stony ground that the seed fell on, and what is the thorny ground that the seed fell on, and what is the good soil that the seed fell on. But we need to understand that it was only the good soil that received the seed to where it grew to bear fruit. And so it was only the good soil that was truly saved. The rest of them were not truly saved. They didn't bear fruit, and that is the test of a true disciple right there, of whether or not they bear fruit. So they received the seed, it took root, it grew, and it bore fruit within their lives. But friends, they wanted to hear it. They wanted to receive it. They heard the gospel, and they were like, yes, I hear that. I want that. The Pharisees, they heard the gospel, and they just cast it to the side. So, I don't believe that. Jesus, you cast out demons by the power of Beelzebub. I think they knew better. I think they knew that he was of God. They had to have known he was of God just by the signs that they did. But he threatened their authority. It was their pride that rejected Jesus. He threatened their power, their authority, their prestige. And so they wouldn't humble themselves and turn to Jesus and receive that gospel seed. But the disciples said, you know what? We want to hear more of this. And so many times we find in the gospels that the disciples are like, Jesus, what was that all about? What was that parable all about? And so Jesus would tell them, Jesus, teach us how to pray. And so Jesus would tell them and he would teach them. And so true disciple today comes to Jesus in prayer. A true disciple today comes to Jesus in his word. Says, Jesus, I want to hear from you. I want to know what you have to say. I want to seek you. And if we seek him, we're going to find him. And so that's what a true disciple is. It's just not going to be somebody that says, oh, I don't care. You know, I've heard what Jesus said, don't really understand it, but I don't, you know, what does it matter? I don't really care. No, a true disciple wants to know. They have that desire, they have that longing within them to truly want to know. And they're going to seek Jesus out, and Jesus is going to let them know. And that is the good news. Friends, it's good news worthy of sharing. So would you share this video so others can receive it when they believe it, when they call upon Jesus?